Welcome to Workforce 3.0. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Councilmember Liz Brown, President Pro Tem of Columbus City Council. Thank you, Liz, for taking this time out of your schedule to talk with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to have this chat with you.
Great. So I want to start off by asking you, when we all look around, it's tough to be in public life. And I'm curious as to what inspired you to decide that you wanted to run for council and serve on Columbus City Council.
Well, I've always been energized by politics and public policy, and politics have always been a topic of the dinner table conversation growing up. I volunteered for political campaigns throughout college, never really wanted to do it professionally until I basically did something else first. So I thought I wanted to write, and I went into journalism. And for a year, I worked at a magazine. And during that time, I thought about the time I spent, the gap year I took between high school and college, which I did an AmeriCorps position for City Year. Mm-hmm. And that role, it was working directly with kids. And when you work with kids in a classroom, you have a just totally different perspective on the world. I mean, in general, kids sharpen your perspective on the world, I think. But in a classroom, I started to understand this intersection between public policy and people's lives. And I was really motivated from kind of the micro perspective, how a child whom I would walk around the building and talk about his or her day or his or her night the night before, what they were coming to the classroom with, right? I was motivated to try to change that individual's experience, motivation, etc. But even at 18, when I did AmeriCorps, I saw its connection to larger policy, things like housing policy, wage policy, not just education policy itself. Those really weighted how a child could succeed or not. Mm-hmm. And so then fast forward, when I graduated and I got a job in journalism, I just perceived that this sense of fulfillment I'd had doing the work of AmeriCorps after I graduated high school kind of wasn't there. I had a lot of opinions and wanted to kind of get back into that public policy realm. So I went into campaigns and government, kind of bounced between the two in my 20s until I worked for the city and saw up close what council members get to do. Local governing, as you know, Lisa, is different from other levels of governing.
Absolutely.
It's just, you're right there. You get to kind of live and work around your co-conspirators to change your community. You get this really close contact with constituents that drive what you do, feed your ideas. It's less, there's always advocacy and lobbying in government, but it's less lobbying focused and more kind of constituent resident focused. And I absolutely fell in love with it. And that's when I decided I wanted to run.
That's fantastic, because I laugh at that, because I used to say to my husband all the time, oh, it's easier to be at the local level. It's much harder to be at the state. And now that I work at the local level, I mean, you are going in the grocery store, you're walking down the street, your constituents are right with you, right?
Definitely. Your neighbors will, call you up and ask you about the problems they have.
Right.
But that's fine. And actually, I think that's kind of fun. And my kids have a sense for what I do already, because we kind of live and breathe it, which again, it can cut both ways, but I do like it. And you get to really understand the impact you have in an up close way. So it's really fulfilling. And it's a reminder. I think that the nature of local governing is a reminder that, a law, an ordinance, whatever, is more than the words on a page. There's always a person at the other side of it, right? At the end of that, it's not just a theory. It's not just an idea. Policies are about people. And so when we kind of live and work and breathe in this space together, we always remember that people are at the end of it.
So what are the issues that have really animated your time on council that have really, I think I know some of them, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell me what are the top issues that have really animated your time?
Yeah. For me, it's really families, family stability. And when I think about how we can either reinforce or foster family stability or hold it back, so much of it
Mhm.
starts and ends with women, and the position of women in our community.
Mhm.
We I think that if you want to understand how healthy a community is, you just have to take a look at how well are women doing in that community, and
Mhm.
that will tell you so much.
Agreed.
So for me, I've always had that lens, that family and women's focused lens. Because if you bring that to almost any policy area, I think you're going to sharpen your focus on making a difference. And you're also typically going to be looking at it in a way that it hasn't traditionally been examined, because traditionally, men have called the shots, men have built power. Men have been the policymakers. And so if we are bringing a women's lens to everything we do, we are mixing it up. And what's especially important, I am a white woman, and I have to understand the limitations of the lens that I can bring to any issue too, because white women have to, when women have been at the table, too often it's white women, and it's not the lens of women of color. And so we have to make space for that too, or again, we're not fighting for the right changes. Um, so for example, I've fought for, I've passed a paid family leave policy for City of Columbus employees that hadn't previously existed. We looked at it not just as caregiving when a new baby is born, but also the disproportionate amount of caregiving that women do for people, members of their family, all throughout their lives. So if a parent is aging, if a spouse is sick, or a brother or sister is sick, typically it's the women in the family that are looked to
Mhm.
provide that care. So we really need to think about caregiving, and what it means in all stages. When we look at the idea of living wages, living wage jobs, right? I mean, providing living wage jobs and making sure that service sector jobs are paying living wages,
Right.
that is critically important, because so many women hold those service sector jobs. And if we want to make families stable, we have to ensure that more and more jobs pay a living wage, and more homes are affordable. I've also championed our pre-K program in the city of Columbus called Early Start Columbus. That predated my time on council, but it's been a big issue for me to take up. I've chaired the education committee since I started. And so we provide pre-K scholarships to just under 1,000 4-year-olds every year.
Mhm.
And that's important. But we also have to look at all the other issues that affect it. One being often the women in the classroom who are teaching those kids. How
Mhm.
are we doing more to support those women in their careers as educators, or simply in their roles as heads of their own household? How do we drive up training? How do we drive up wages? How do we ensure stability of childcare centers? All of these things we have to also look at, in addition to just the sort of brass tacks of the scholarship program itself. And that's what's so
Mhm.
cool about public policy making is,
Mhm.
you confront a problem, but there are all these other factors kind of
Right.
swirling around it. So nothing's ever just head on. You got to think
Right.
about everything. It makes it really fun and interesting, engaging.
And it's so true what you're saying. Women hold some of the most important jobs in society. And from a workforce perspective, I always say, workforce preparation and development, it starts in the womb. And
Yep.
if you don't have children who have good daycare, good pre-K, good education all the way through, by the time we're dealing with young adults, so much is so much of the foundation has been set, and it's very hard to go back and repair that foundation.
It's so true.
So
It's so true.
I imagine having children, I know for me this has been true in my career. I imagine having children of your own has even made it more clear to you how important those issues are.
Yeah, it really has. I have 3 kids. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a almost 7-month-old.
Oh gosh,
Um, Yeah, she's growing. And, I have a deep appreciation for what women have to navigate on a daily basis when they also are caregivers in their own homes. I also deeply understand the value that women provide in the workplace because of that too. I mean, I think that never underestimate the power of a woman because of of everything she has to do. But one thing I often think about is sometimes I can like barely make it through the day with my head screwed on straight, and just like challenge here,
Mhm.
challenge there, putting out fires, and not to mention doing my job. And I think about how many supports I have, and how lucky I am to have those supports. I have a stable income. I have reliable childcare, unless a child is sick, right? And then, I'm
Right.
scrambling like others. But I have generally reliable childcare, and I have a stable income, and I have a spouse. And for women who don't have any one of those three things, or none of those three things,
Mhm.
um, the just getting through the day is a very tall order. And
Mhm.
it's worse for all of us when we don't provide um, sort of that community of solutions around women to help make sure they can show up for their jobs, make a living wage, provide for their families, and make sure their kids then have. And this is something I learned thinking back on that AmeriCorps program I did. Um, just the way the kids carry so much of us with them throughout the day,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I think as parents, maybe it's easy to forget that, but kids carry a lot with them. And
Yes.
when we can free them up to get into that classroom and just be there and learn and ask questions and feel validated, and that's an investment in the future, right? That, I mean, thinking
Mhm.
about your work,
Absolutely.
Lisa, I mean, those are the people we want in our future workforce. Sort of
Mhm.
the industrious, creative, validated little brains that will grow into economic engines.
Right. And come up with the new innovations and ideas to
Yeah,
fix the other solutions that are going to be popping up, right?
right.
That we need to pop
Mhm.
up to solve problems. Yeah, I don't think I think we underestimate too how much children perceive the reality of their situation, even when we think we're hiding it from them, right?
Yep.
Um, so I'm sure you saw that a lot in
Yeah.
AmeriCorps.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
so let's talk about some of those solutions. So what do you think some of those solutions are? I
Mhm.
know you've talked in the past about, I know you're passionate about childcare and childcare workers.
Yep.
I know you've been passionate about wages.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
what do you think some of those policy
Yeah.
solutions should be?
I mean, I think one of the most important policy solutions for family stability, I'll name two I think that are equally important, which is stable housing and high quality, affordable childcare. I believe in universal childcare, universal high
Mhm.
quality childcare. I believe in its transformative power for families. I think that that is true whether you have an infant or whether you have a 9-year-old, right, whose school day ends
Mhm.
at 3:30.
Mhm.
And the when I say it has transformative power, for several reasons. One of which, as a parent, I understand the ways in which I can only do my job when I feel safe about what my kids are doing, right? And,
Absolutely.
right. And not only are, okay, they're not going to die, not just that kind of safety, but the thriving, the teaching, the learning,
Mhm.
that high quality childcare can provide. So whether it's a full day of childcare or after school, that is something that I think is a baseline investment that can really transform families. And when we look at early childhood in particular, there is a accepted notion out there that is being interrogated now more and more, I think, by the science, that childcare workers are essentially babysitters. They just kind of mind the children, make sure that they get their snacks and that they don't, um, you know, have too many bumps and scrapes. Even with an infant who is 8 months old, there is a real science to how to care for that child.
Mm-hmm.
So high quality childcare settings are absolutely reliant on workers in those settings having access to training and credentialing,
Mm-hmm.
having access to the wages that allow them to get that training and the wages that honor that training. So really, if we're going to design a system that does transform families and that serves families the best, we'd be talking about, pay parity with public school teachers for
Mm-hmm.
early childhood educators from an early age. We'd be talking about a system that every household can afford. And the federal government, their guidelines for what's affordable childcare is no more than 7% of a family's income. That's astounding. Any parents who are listening to this can do that math real quick, and I bet you're paying more than 7%.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But when you think about all the other demands on a family's income, housing, food, transportation, childcare, it can't be another, demand another 40% of your pay like housing does. And so that's what the federal government has assigned as affordability. And truly, a system that serves everyone would make sure it was affordable for all families and that you're not sacrificing quality to do so. So we're having trained teachers in the classrooms with pay parity and who understand how to really work with kids and spark curiosity and lay the groundwork for that brain development. And then that second, I think, real transformative power for families is stable housing. And that is in Columbus. I mean, every city has to have a different approach. In Columbus right now, you and I know several sort of data points that are really important for us to remember, which is that we're growing by a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're adding, we're growing by 50% over the next 50 years. I think I have that number right.
Yes, no, you're
Um,
right.
yes, but at the same time, there are in the next 5 years, there will be more luxury apartments coming online every day than affordable ones. We know that the bottom third of people, of income earners, have a very hard time affording a dignified place to live. And
Mm-hmm.
so everything is just kind of backwards in the market right now, that there's more available for the highest earners than the lowest earners. And that is an unsustainable model for family stability and family security. So we've got to infuse the market with more affordable options. It's not just about more housing, more housing, more housing. It's about more housing that is affordable to families, whether that's, vouchers, whether the federal government can do more there, or whether it's tax, affordable housing tax credit projects, and we can do
Right.
more to leverage that, or whether it's, just getting more creative with lending models that allow for more affordable housing to be developed, and how we can bring public money to bear on that. But we've got to get very serious about it. And there are reforms along the way that council has worked on. My colleague, Councilmember Shayla Favor, did a Housing for All package, which I thought was really important, where we did things like ban source of income discrimination when
Mm-hmm.
you're applying for housing, which is a fairly common way to discriminate
It's
against
very.
families.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, those are two of the really important places we have to start, Lisa, if we're going to support women. And then, the third one that I will call out that the city can't independently do, but that I think is really important to fight for, is paid family leave. And there's energy around that at the federal government right now. It won't happen with it won't happen probably with the numbers we have in the Senate, Democrats have in the Senate right now. I think it would be really hard to get paid family leave passed through the Senate, but the House and the White House, I think would be able to put together a good program. So we've got to be focused on the Democratic makeup in the Senate, strengthening those Democratic numbers if we want a federal paid family leave policy to pass. It's really important for families, for women, for men, for parents, for children of aging parents, for all of us. It's really important. But I also want to highlight that small businesses, and you know that a lot of small businesses are owned by women of color, these
Mhm.
small and micro-sized businesses, um, they are disadvantaged by the lack of a federal paid family leave policy, because these larger companies now, Deloitte, Chase, all of these larger companies now have the ability. I think Google offers like 6 months paid family leave now, right? They
Right, right. They're offering it as a benefit to attract
That's
talent,
right. That's
right?
right. And so
So
small businesses are at a disadvantage if we don't have a federal program that allows all people to choose where they want to work. They don't have to be yoked to a large company, right, in order to get these benefits. So I know housing and childcare, I think, are the two really critical places to start. But I definitely wanted to, in answer to your question, make sure I mentioned the really important kind of family infrastructure that paid family leave provides.
and we know that other countries who do well successfully economically have that built in just as what's expected, right?
Yep.
Because they know, like for child, when a child comes into a family, regardless of how that child gets there, right?
Yeah.
That we know that that early time with the child is really going to set the foundation for everything else. And
Absolutely.
so, all these issues are very much, if you're focused on economic development and the economic prosperity of the region, of our region in particular, since that's where we are, right? These things are so incredibly important. I love housing, because I also have housing and housing policy in my past life. And, I have all of these companies in the whole metro area. Oh, we can't find workers. Well, if you're building your facility or where you want people to come to work in areas where workers can't afford to live,
Yeah.
and so not thinking about, first of all, maybe building closer to where people can work, but also making sure that they have, housing is a platform for the delivery of everything else,
Yeah.
right? Good
Absolutely.
health outcomes, good education outcomes, the ability to work,
Yeah.
right? And all these issues are extremely important. So how do we get everybody on this board, on this bandwagon?
Well, there's the $1 million question, Lisa. I
Right,
would be king of the
right.
world if I could answer that. No, I think that I do think that shocks to the system do have a way of kind of waking people up to what was ailing us, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And COVID certainly exposed the systems that were failing,
mhm.
and especially when it comes to childcare. Because suddenly my lack of childcare was appearing on your computer screen,
Yeah,
right?
right,
Or was
right.
preventing me from clocking in, or meant that I left my job because I had no other options, right? Like these kind of they the failures, the cracks, the fissures were really exposed.
Mhm,
And so I think we have a window now to get serious about a childcare solution for our community, with some urgency, so that people who were still like kind of freshly a little bit in the pandemic, partway out, and people understand this notion that childcare is infrastructure. I really like that framing that the White House has been using. I think Elizabeth Warren actually was the first national figure to really be pushing on that framing back a couple years ago now,
mhm,
before COVID. But I think that it is apt, and so we have to keep hammering that, and think big about our childcare system, and how we fund an equitable childcare system. The thing that folks really need to understand, if you don't have kids in the childcare system now, if you're not super familiar with it, it is astronomically expensive.
mhm,
Average, annual uh, private pay for a family cost, I guess, is I think about $11,000 in the state of Ohio, so 10,000, so higher here in Columbus,
mhm.
because we're a little bit higher than the state level. But it's not because there's too much money in the system, there's still not enough. Like even
Right.
those high costs don't cover everything we need from a quality standpoint. And
Mhm.
that's why the public deserves a say in it. That's why I believe that there needs to be more public money involved in the childcare system. So that's, I think, one part of how we get people on the bandwagon is not letting up on this childcare as infrastructure piece. And then housing, I mean, again, we're in this weird housing market right now. Plus,
Mhm.
the eviction moratorium is coming to an end. We have to use this moment to really convince people that there are no easy answers, that it takes community wide investment, and we can't take our eye off the prize.
Yeah, I totally agree. So COVID, horrible thing to happen, right? Absolutely. But out of the ashes of that, we can find some potential good things if it brings these two issues,
Right.
especially to the foreground,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'd hate to think we would get past this in another year or two. And, COVID is something we talk about as a remember when thing.
Mhm.
And we don't see any real changes, right?
That would be the real tragedy right there. Like, in
Mhm.
addition to the lives lost, that we
Right.
haven't, solved these greater societal ills. Um, that exactly, that's right. That would be that would be a tragedy a couple years from now.
And I almost think we owe it to those people who've lost their lives, not because of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
To make the kind of changes, and we could talk about a whole bunch of other changes, right, that have come to the forefront during this pandemic.
Mhm.
Those are two particular ones that have a quality of life effect on everybody,
Yep.
regardless of their income. So even now, I think that's what might help too, is people relatively before the pandemic thought they were sitting pretty and had a great life, quickly found out they don't. And then to find out, oh my God, you mean this is what it's like for
Yep.
these other women or
Absolutely.
other families? Hello, wake up.
Yep.
So let's talk about something else that I know. So I know that the Access program, which is about getting savings accounts for kids to be able to save for post-secondary education, that's currently being piloted or was going to be piloted in Columbus, is it not, Access?
Yep. Yep. That
Can
our
you tell me?
of the affordable college and career education starts with saving program. So the abbreviation is access. And we won a national award, the 2019 Ideas Challenge from New Deal, which is a program of young leaders across the country. And so that program is really about, again, it's this thread of problem solving that's really fun about public policy making. So
Mhm.
there's a federal program that provides a match, if for education savings. And that match is leveraged, can be fully leveraged by a local match. So what we did is we didn't put it kind of all on the student to save their own money. They had to, save a little bit. But then between the city of Columbus and and a local bank, we were able to fully leverage the federal match. 100% matched the local match. So what really the result is that the student in our Rec and Parks apps program, which is like a kind of apprenticeship, you're familiar
Mhm.
with it, model
Yes, I
for
am.
for youth. They ended up getting an 8-to-1 match on the dollars that they
Which
set
is
aside.
fantastic.
Yes. So that for us, once we were able to and this was just the policy staff at City Council said, "Hey, there's this federal money that's on the table. What if we really help students access it by putting money in ourselves so they could get the full dollar amount, but also it's not just getting the money out there; it's making sure people know about the program, and because we have apps." as a program within Recreation and Parks, we had a direct line into students and families to say, if you save this money, here is what you can get. And so often that's where policymaking breaks down, is something may be available, but people don't know how to get it, don't know it
Right.
exists. And so this program was really easy for us to actually present as an option to families, celebrate the students who were able to use the funds. Our first class who went through this, I guess it would have been like very early, or no, it would have been late fall 2019. So it wasn't the pandemic yet. So I was able to meet with them, that we had like a pizza party and congratulated and had a bunch of boring speeches, but they got pizza out of it. And
Right, so that solves everything.
right, exactly. The young man I met there, he was with his mother. And I mean, her dream had been to go to college and she had never been able to afford it. And his 4,500 is the total amount that he got. And he was able to use that to he was planning on going to Columbus State in the fall, to begin his, or maybe starting winter semester. I don't remember exactly when, but to begin his degree in sports journalism. And that was his dream. And he was getting to like fulfill his mother's dream, essentially. And it was really beautiful to see the pride spilling out of her eyes as she watched him tell his story to me. And, you know, he was really focused on the plan he had, which was to, start at Columbus State and work up and get really good grades and ultimately graduate from OSU. And he had a whole thing spelled out for me. And I also learned that the APS program was really meaningful to him. And it was his second year doing it, because he appreciated the way that it helped him save money. But this was the first year that we'd, offered this access program. And so he was going to be able to translate that into a career for the first time, not just, wages to help support what he was doing, but really to invest it in the education that would bring him a career. And I think that's one thing that's so important, whether it's vocational, or, or community college, or more, sort of a university. This money helps students achieve their goals.
Yeah, and what's great about it too is so they're getting an opportunity, a work experience too. So they're learning what that means. They're earning, you're right, whatever wage they would earn, but then there's this added individual development account, which it is amazing that money, that type of program has actually been sitting there for a long time, and they were in vogue, and then all of a sudden, people weren't really making use of those IDA funds.
Yeah. Thank you for saying the name of the actual program, the IDAs, that, they had just been sitting there. And that's, it's a funny thing about government and policy is that even for those of us, it's kind of like our job to stay clued in on things. There's plenty of things that we miss, and you have an industrious, policy aide in the policy shop, and she said, hey, wait a second, look what we could be doing. And that provides opportunity to people. So it's
think about the use of, the extended way you could continue to use those for young people if you can get, people to match it, the powers that be, to think about matching that. Because that, again, from a workforce perspective, people being able to have the tuition to get the credentials is so important, and not waiting until, they've been slaving away for 10 years in a job that isn't paying a living wage. We could have been working with them so much earlier and help them get those credentials in the beginning, to solve the problem much earlier. Or, well, at that point, it's not a problem. At that point, it's a bonus to show them where they could go, because they're where they're supposed to be in the first place.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So, well, let me, what else would you like to, so, I'm all about workforce and education and development here. So is there something you wish I would have asked you?
No, I just, you are all about workforce, and, I sat here and talked about childcare and housing.
But those are important. I mean, that is towards work.
That's right. And I just think it's always worthy to point out and explain the interconnectedness of all these issues.
Right.
that like good jobs aren't possible without stable housing and reliable access to high quality childcare. It's we need to make sure that companies are paying living wages also, so that like the stable housing isn't possible without the good job. These really are legs of the same stool, and
They
kind of all
absolutely.
of them have to also reliable transportation we didn't talk about, but that's a leg of the stool too. And they all need to be present if we're really going to be stable. And I just think that should be our goal. I mean, stability,
Mhm.
family stability. It's not just getting by, it's not just barely scraping by, but
Mhm.
to be stable, to have a sense that a year from now, I'm going to be okay. I might be okay today, but to fear that next month things won't be okay, that's not going to help you provide for your family. And have opportunity for your kids or for yourself in the future. So as much as we can prop up all those legs of the stool, they are dependent on one another, and they really drive that stability that allows families to dream, that allows kids to dream, that allows the young man I met to, go into sports journalism and create a future for his family, and allows his mom to know that my son's life will be better than mine. That's kind of
Mhm.
the American story we tell ourselves and
Mhm.
mostly fail to achieve. But I think we have the power to shore up these supports that actually provide that, stable foundation for families.
Absolutely. All right. Well, now I'm going to ask you maybe the hardest question I'll ask you, or
All right.
maybe it's the easiest as we end this. So, Liz, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about what your 18-year-old self should have done or should be doing when you think about where you came, where you've ended up in your career? What
Yeah.
advice would you give?
So I'm big on no regrets. So,
Oh,
my
good.
life might have gone here or there or twist or turned, but I wouldn't go back and tell myself to do something differently. I would counsel my younger self to, you know, like run towards um, the busy work sometimes. I think that when you're maybe young and hungry to make a difference, you might not recognize the ways in which kind of the small things, the busy work, the mundane tasks are developing your leadership and developing your ability to give back.
Mhm.
So that's just like general career advice for people, is that you don't have to be doing the most glamorous stuff to be learning a lot. Be a sponge and get the work you're asked to do done, because
Mhm.
that's how you build trust. And then I guess I would also tell my 18-year-old self that I was doing the right thing by going into AmeriCorps. I had doubts about that decision. I made that decision because my older sister suggested it to me, because I just didn't feel like I wanted to go straight on to college. I was mostly raised in a small town in Licking County, and I just didn't quite there was something in me that just didn't quite want to go right into college, even though I knew that's where I wanted to go ultimately. So my sister suggested it. And when I researched it and applied and got accepted, it felt really right. But then all my friends were going off to college, and suddenly I had a lot of self doubt. And I really wasn't sure about whether I was making the wrong decision. And, graduating from college at 23 instead of 22 made me feel like I'm going to be so behind. And, you know,
Yeah.
I doubted
No,
whether
I
I
know.
right, I doubted whether I should do it. I thought it would maybe hold back my career. I mean, I kind of went off to that experience with a lot of self-doubt and a lot of anxiety. And so I would, in addition to kind of telling myself to embrace the small stuff and, all that other career advice stuff I gave, I think I would just reassure my 18-year-old self that following whatever little voice inside me was telling me to do something different was the right move, because it allowed me to learn what I should expect from my career. And that is a
Mhm.
sense going to bed at night that I have made a difference
Mhm.
in someone's day or in the world during that day. I felt that every day when I was an AmeriCorps member, and it has really driven me, because that was the guiding light I always wanted to get back to. It was really driven me to ultimately be here, where sure, sometimes days are hard, um, and really hard. Sometimes the pressure or the stress feels less than worth it. But ultimately, I'm driven by this idea that I can and hopefully do make a difference for the better in someone's life.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I could not top that. So I think that is great advice. And the fact that you were given the space to do that,
Mhm.
that's what I wish for people, young people who, there's so much pressure to go to college and get started. And, you start to find out the older you get, you start to find out life is long.
Yes.
And that was a worthwhile little turn that gave you a lot. So that's great.
It was. They also
Well,
provide an education scholarship. If anyone listening is a young person or young people, AmeriCorps, and they haven't been able to grow the scholarship much from when I was there, but they provide a stipend for living and then a scholarship to go back
mhm.
to some kind of school afterwards. So just do it.
Well, on that, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And everybody, I hope you'll turn in for our next Workforce 3.0 and join me in thanking you, Liz Brown. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.